Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about something that happens quite often in the gaming world. Titles that, despite being launched with great anticipation, end up being quickly forgotten. Let's dive into details about 10 recent games that have already fallen into oblivion. Get ready for a comprehensive analysis of each of them, discussing their stories, gameplay, reception, and why they couldn't hold the player's attention. So let's get started. 1. Forspoken 2023. Forspoken, developed by Luminous Productions and published by Square Enix, was released in January 2023. This action-adventure game follows the story of Fry, a young woman from New York who is transported to the magical world of Athia. Fry must use her newfound magical abilities to survive and uncover the secrets of Athia. The game promised much with its impressive graphics and vast open world filled with magical creatures and stunning landscapes. However, the narrative was widely criticized for being predictable, and the dialogues were considered weak and forced. The gameplay, although initially attractive, was seen as repetitive and lacking in innovation. Players quickly lost interest as technical problems also piled up, negatively affecting the overall experience. Additionally, Forspoken failed to provide significant in-game content, resulting in a rapidly declining player base. All these factors contributed to Forspoken being quickly forgotten after its release. 2. Babylon's Fall 2022. Babylon's Fall, developed by Platinum Games and published by Square Enix, was released in March 2022. This online multiplayer action game promised intense combat and a unique visual style inspired by oil paintings. Players took on the role of sentinels, warriors who must climb the Tower of Babel to face powerful enemies and uncover ancient secrets. However, Babylon's Fall faced extremely negative reception. The graphics were harshly criticized for appearing dated and of low quality, especially for a title released in an era of high-definition graphics. The gameplay was deemed monotonous, with repetitive and unchallenging missions. Furthermore, the game suffered from technical issues and a lack of meaningful content, discouraging many players from the start. The player community failed to stay engaged, leading to a rapid decline in active players. Less than a year after its release, the servers were shut down, marking the end of Babylon's Fall and its quick descent into obscurity. 3. Battlefield 2042-2021. Battlefield 2042, developed by DICE and published by Electronic Arts, was released in November 2021. This title was expected to be a grand return for the Battlefield series, offering large-scale combat with up to 128 players on massive maps. The game introduced new gameplay modes, futuristic gadgets, and modern vehicles. Despite high expectations, Battlefield 2042 launched with a series of technical issues that drastically affected the player experience. Bugs, performance issues, and connection problems were widely reported. Additionally, many players missed classic series content, such as the single-player campaign mode and a variety of maps and weapons. The lack of polish and controversial design choices, like removing the traditional soldier classes, led to severe criticism. The negative response from the community resulted in a rapid decline in active players, and Battlefield 2042 was quickly forgotten, with many returning to earlier titles in the series. 4. Outriders 2021. Outriders, developed by People Can Fly and published by Square Enix, was released in April 2021. This third-person shooter RPG offered an intense cooperative experience, where players could choose from 4 unique character classes, each with distinct abilities and play styles. The game started strong, with an enthusiastic player base and an intriguing narrative about the colonization of a distant planet and the struggle for survival. However, Outriders suffered from a series of technical problems, including server failures and bugs that affected player progress. Additionally, the lack of significant in-game content and repetitive missions led to a rapid decline in player interest. Without constant updates to keep the community engaged, Outriders quickly fell into obscurity, despite its initial potential and ongoing support from the developers. 5. Godfall 2020. Godfall, developed by Counterplay Games and published by Gearbox Publishing, was released in November 2020 as one of the first titles for the PlayStation 5. This looter-slasher promised intense melee combat and stunning visuals, with a combat system focused on melee weapons and epic armor. The game offered a narrative set in a fantasy world divided into realms based on the elements earth, water, air, and fire. Players took on the role of a knight who must defeat powerful enemies and collect loot to upgrade their equipment. Despite the initial hype, Godfall was criticized for its shallow narrative, lack of character depth, and repetitive gameplay. Many players felt that the game did not offer enough content to justify its high price. The lack of variety in missions and the absence of a robust cooperative multiplayer mode also contributed to its rapid obscurity. 6. Marvel's Avengers 2020. Released in September 2020, Marvel's Avengers by Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix had everything to be a success. Based on the popular Marvel heroes, the game offered an engaging single-player campaign and a cooperative multiplayer mode where players could take on the roles of their favorite Avengers. Initially, the game attracted attention with its interesting narrative and high-quality visuals. However, after completing the main campaign, players found a game full of problems. The gameplay became repetitive, with similar missions and a loot system that did not adequately reward player efforts. Technical problems, bugs, and server failures also contributed to player frustration. Additionally, the lack of significant in-game content and aggressive monetization discouraged many fans. The player community quickly lost interest, and Marvel's Avengers fell into obscurity, despite developers' efforts to revitalize the game with updates and new content. 7. Scape 2020. Scape, developed by Ubisoft, was released in July 2020 as an attempt to compete in the Battle Royale genre. The game introduced unique mechanics, such as parkour abilities and hacks that altered gameplay. Set in a futuristic city, the game offered an innovative take on the genre, with vertical maps and fast-paced combat. Despite the innovations, Scape faced several challenges. Many players found the learning curve steep and the gameplay confusing. The game also struggled to stand out in an already saturated market with popular titles like Fortnite, Apex Legends, and Call of Duty: Warzone. The lack of balance and the absence of an attractive progression system contributed to the decline in player interest. The player base quickly dwindled after launch, and Ubisoft could not maintain interest with significant updates. Scape was quickly forgotten, and its servers were shut down shortly after. 8. Crucible 2020. Crucible, developed by Amazon Game Studios, was a third-person shooter released in May 2020. With a mix of MOBA and Battle Royale elements, Crucible tried to stand out in a saturated market. Players chose from various hunters, each with unique abilities, and competed in several game modes. Unfortunately, the game suffered from confusing gameplay, lack of clear direction, and various technical issues. The negative reception led Amazon to take the unprecedented decision to return the game to closed beta just a month after its release. Even with adjustments and improvements, Crucible could not regain player interest. The lack of effective marketing and the inability to differentiate the game from other titles in the market resulted in a small, disengaged player base. Eventually, Amazon Game Studios decided to cancel development and shut down the servers, marking the end of Crucible and its rapid disappearance from players' memory. 9. Bleeding Edge 2020. Bleeding Edge, developed by Ninja Theory and published by Xbox Game Studios, was released in March 2020. This team-based combat game offered stylized characters, each with unique abilities, and dynamic melee combat. The aim was to provide a fun and frenetic multiplayer experience. Despite the initial promise, Bleeding Edge faced several issues that contributed to its rapid obscurity. The lack of significant content at launch, the absence of varied game modes, and the repetitiveness of the matches were major points of criticism. Additionally, the player community could not stay engaged, and the player base quickly dwindled. Post-launch support was insufficient to revive interest in the game, and Bleeding Edge rapidly disappeared from players' radar. 10. Disintegration 2020. Disintegration, developed by V1 Interactive and published by Private Division, was released in June 2020. This first-person shooter combined RTS elements, promising a unique experience. Players took on the role of Romer Scholl, a former Grabsicle pilot leading a resistance group against an oppressive force known as Rayon. The game's premise was intriguing, and the combination of first-person combat with real-time strategy elements offered an interesting concept. However, the execution fell short. The narrative was considered weak and unengaging, and the game mechanics did not integrate well, resulting in a confusing experience. The lukewarm reception and lack of players led to the shutdown of the multiplayer servers in less than a year. Without an active community, and with negative reviews, Disintegration was quickly forgotten, marking the end of another attempt to innovate in the shooter genre. And that's it, folks. These were 10 recent games that, despite initial expectations, ended up being quickly forgotten. Stay tuned for more analysis and curiosities about the world of games. See you next time, and keep on gaming!